1993, Dr. Ifill joined the faculty of University of Maryland School of Law, where in addition to teaching civil procedure, constitutional law, and a variety of seminars, she continued to litigate and consult on the broad and diverse range of civil rights cases while grooming the next generation of civil rights lawyers. From a base in Baltimore, Dr. Ifill emerged as a highly regarded national civil rights strategist and public intellectual whose writings, speeches, and media appearances enrich public debate about a range of political and civil rights issues. A critically acclaimed author of the book On the Courthouse Lawn, Confronting the Legacy of Lynching in the 21st Century, reflects a lifelong engagement in the analysis of issues of race in American public life. Dr. Ifill's scholarly writing has focused on the importance of diversity on the bench, and she is currently writing a book about the race and Supreme Court confirmation hearings. Dr. Ifill is the immediate past chair of the Board of U.S. Programs at the Open Society Institute, one of the largest philanthropic supporters of civil rights and social justice organizations in the country. She is a graduate of Vassar College and received her JD from New York University School of Law. Put your hands together for Dr. Sherrilyn Ifill.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? If you can't hear me, put your hand up, please. You can't hear me. Okay, I'm gonna pump it up. Good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled and delighted to be here with you. I know that we are pressed for time, but I do have some things that need to be said. I want to first thank our Bishop, Bishop Davis, for inviting me today, but not just today, for staying connected with me, for making space for me to bring information, updates, action plans to our district, to weave together my love of our church and my love for civil rights in a way that I think honors what we are trying to accomplish. I thank the Episcopal Supervisor in her absence, all of the clergy who are present, lay who are present, the program participants, the young people who performed, everyone on the dais, and I hope that's everybody. Let me begin with my AME bona fides, and I do this so that when it gets a little salty, y'all will treat me like I'm in the family, because y'all understand I'm family, okay? So I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, where where I attended Allen AME Church when it was pastored by then Reverend Donald Ming, later Bishop Ming. Yeah, I take it back. And then, of course, Reverend Floyd Flake, later, the Floyd Flake everybody knows. But I remember the first day he came in. Then I moved to Brooklyn and was a member of Bridge Street AME Church. And then I moved to Baltimore, where I sat with my family under the extraordinary leadership of then Reverend, now Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie. And then I went a little bit up the road, where I sat under the extraordinary leadership of Reverend Dr. Ann Lightner Fuller at Mount Calvary AME Church. And now my pastor is Reverend Bobby Cox at Mount Calvary AME Church. Where's Reverend Cox? Somewhere here. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is I am a lifelong AME. You know that my uncle Oliver Ursel Ifill was secretary of our church. You know that my cousin Gwen Ifill was a faithful member of Metropolitan in Washington, D.C. You know that my cousin Earl was a presiding elder in Atlanta. I say all of that to say, I'm gonna say some stuff, okay? So the theme in intergenerational values and beliefs do we dare believe? Give me again the still dare to believe. Still dare to believe. And I love this theme because I think it hits on two areas that I want to talk about. One is this intergenerational values and belief, but also to talk about daring and what it means to dare. I have no doubt that we share values and beliefs that all of us are trying to communicate in our communities and to our young people. Those values are love, faith, generosity, charity, forgiveness, compassion, sacrifice, integrity. These are all the values that I don't have any doubt we are all united in believing that we are compelled to communicate to our young people, and we are. But there are other values that we have to communicate as well. Values like power. Power. See, it always gets quiet when I say power because we feel nervous about power. But power, truth, dignity, resilience, tenacity. All of these are also values and beliefs that we want to communicate to our children and to our communities. How do we communicate these values? One way we communicate is what we say. But more importantly, you know, is what we do. What we do. So I want to talk a little bit today about what we do because we are in a time of crisis in this country. We can pretend, we can turn off the news, we can tell ourselves these things come in cycles, we can tell ourselves we've been here before, we can say all the things we say to comfort ourselves out of the full recognition of the depth of the crisis that we find ourselves in this country. We have reached the point in this country where those who have been our opponents, who enslaved us, who marginalized us, who bought and sold us, who segregated us, who beat us, who disenfranchised us, who miseducated us, who raped us. Those have decided that if they cannot hold power, they would rather burn the whole thing down than share it. They would rather burn the whole thing down than share power. The reason we know it is because it's not as though we were taking over. I was just talking with Bishop about the trauma for many of these people of President Obama being elected. And without a doubt, it was traumatic. It wasn't just that he was black, it's that he was black and excellent. It was that his wife was black and excellent. It's that his children were black, excellent, and cute. It's that he brought with him to Washington a whole coterie of black and excellent people who he put in his cabinet and put in positions and who walked around Washington in positions of power. I remember the day I knew we were in trouble. It was negotiations over the health care bill. Very early. President Obama invited Republicans up to the White House to share their concerns at a meeting. And at that meeting, the president was sitting at a table. Books, binders, studies, actuarial tables, all were out on the table. And they were all sitting around the table, and the President of the United States was running this meeting. He was not just presiding, he was answering all the questions. He knew all the figures. He knew all the details. He was brilliant. And at that meeting, I said to my husband, they are never going to get over this. Later on, I talked to someone very close to the president about that meeting, and that person said to me, yes, what you saw was the truth. And they said then they would never come back to the White House and sit in a meeting with him again. That's how badly he embarrassed them just by being him. Okay. But were we taking over, really? I'm going to tell you something I remind my students of, which I think that we forget. Black people constitute 13% of the population in this country. I didn't say 30, I didn't say 20, I didn't even say 15. I said 13% of the population. I remind young people of that sometimes, because when they talk about why don't we just take over, I'm like, the math ain't mathin', as they say. 13% of the population. Now listen, we leverage the mess out of that 13%. That's why most white people, when you poll them, think that black people constitute 50% of the population. Because their kids are listening to our music, their kids are wearing the clothes and the trends that our kids set. Our politicians are the most charismatic. We are the entertainers that are the most interesting and attractive and people want to see. Our athletes dominate every sport. We are so leveraging the 13% that they think that we're taking over. So that's got two sides. The good side is we're able to punch above our weight. We exercise more power than our numbers would suggest. We can get a subject that everybody's talking about for a week. We used to be able at least to shame somebody, right? We could show up and shame somebody. We had that kind of power. But the dark side of it is these people are living in perpetual fear, a kind of paranoid fear of extinction. And we have not been there before as a nation. The only time we faced this was when your parents and your grandparents and your grandparents faced this in the South. When black people constituted the majority of the population in so many counties in Mississippi and in South Carolina. Don't you know that's why they were disenfranchising you and that's why they had to beat you and lynch you? Because they feared takeover. And so much of what we're seeing right now when my colleagues say, you know, we've never seen this before in this country. Yes, we have. But it used to be confined to one region of the country during one period of time. And what we have seen now is that what used to live in the Jim Crow South, the violence, the disenfranchisement, the cruelty, the open racism, the control over education, the control over the truth, that has metastasized like a cancer. And now it is a national problem. So we have seen this before, which suggests some things to me. If we've seen this before, then why aren't we talking to the people who lived it before? Why aren't we delving back into our past? People say me all the time, and I do this too. I've talked to people in Eastern Europe who lived through democracies turning into authoritarian regimes to understand the signs, what you have to do, how do you get out of it. But we have some of that information right here. Right here. The difference then was that one could appeal to the national, and now the national has been co-opted. And this is where this moment is different. Trump did not create the problem that we are facing at this moment. Trump did not create the problems that we have been facing since we arrived on these shores. When you think about the most awful videos of police violence that you saw before George Floyd, Obama was president. Ferguson, Walter Scott running in that park in South Carolina, Freddie Gray. Obama was president. Trump didn't bring that. We've been dealing with police violence against unarmed black people for 100 years. So these problems were not created by Trump. But he is an accelerant. You know what an accelerant is? He's an accelerant, right? He puts the gasoline on the fire, and that's how it's burning out of control. He's an accelerant. What he said to white people was, you know how you've been feeling like you have to be careful about what you say around black people, what you say to women, what you call women? You know how you've had to not say that you think you're better? You know how you've had to pretend that you don't feel some of these things that you feel? Go on and feel it. Say what you want to say. Not only should you do it, you must do it. You must do it. What he gave is he removed the velvet rope away from decency. And what he appealed to was, he encouraged them to revel in being your worst self. And who knew that so many Americans were just waiting for someone to tell them they could be their worst self and it would be all right. So what we're seeing now is a moral decay, we're seeing a political decay, we're seeing an educational decay. But understand something going back to our power and what we leverage. They didn't want to have to do it this way. They didn't want to have to do it this way. They believe the only way they can hold power is to drop all of these things on the road. They don't believe they can make it to holding on to power while carrying these things that they believe now are too heavy a burden to carry. Decency, norms and ethics, the rule of law, democracy itself, patriotism. They will run up under Putin in a minute. They don't care about the rule of law. They will be indecent. They will be hypocrites. They'll say one thing one day, say another thing the next day. All of those things, they have abandoned all of the norms that hold us together. Right now, part of the reason this room works is because of norms. There is no law telling me that I should not drink from Bishop Davis's glass. But I'm not going to do it, because that would be foul. Right? It would be indecent. Right? Some of you are gonna sit. You're sitting around this table, and you didn't say anything, but you adjusted your chairs to each other, so you weren't all up on each other, so you'd have enough room. And if somebody else came to the table, you move and you make a place. You know, there's no law saying how to do that. You don't need a rule. It's just our norms of how we deal with one another. So, for example, if you are sitting on the highest court of the land, even if there's not a law saying that your wife shouldn't be down at a rally where the former president is exhorting people to overturn the election, you kind of just wouldn't do it. Right? That's how my profession works, with norms and ethics. But now it turns out we need laws for everything. If I were president, I wouldn't hire my daughter as my senior advisor. But it turns out we need a law, right? And then we need enforcement of those laws. So look at all the things they left, the decency, the norms, the ethics. And then Trump took something else that was a powerful tool for us. Shame. Oh, you can't shame anybody anymore. You can't shame anybody. They'll say anything. They'll use when I knew it was over was when that little boy, his mama drove him across state lines with an AR-15, and he killed 2 people. And when she came into a GOP dinner back in her home state, they gave her a standing ovation. The mama who drove the 17-year-old with a gun to a rally that he saw on Facebook, where he killed 2 people. Now, I thought we were all joined in the belief that we don't really want our children to be killers. I didn't think that was like a racial thing or a partisan thing. I thought that was like a thing. They gave her a standing ovation. Because you can't be shamed. You can't say anything. You can't do anything. And shame for us was a powerful tool. Shame allowed that Edmund Pettus Bridge to be broadcast on a Sunday night in March and us to have a Voting Rights Act by August. Because that Sunday night, when they were showing the film Judgment at Nuremberg for the first time on network television, and they interrupted with breaking news. So now we have breaking news every 2 seconds, but then it was breaking news was really breaking news, right? Remember that this is just, what, 2 years after breaking news was a president had been assassinated. So breaking news was a real thing. And the breaking news were images from Selma, Alabama. And Americans who were watching this film, Judgment at Nuremberg, about Nazi Germany, were confronted with images that made them wonder who we are. And they felt shame. And that's how we were able to continue the march and move in less than a year and get a Voting Rights Act. It was shame and empathy that drew tens of millions of Americans out of their homes for the largest civil rights protest we have ever seen in this country after George Floyd was killed. Shame and empathy. Empathy is when you feel for another person, not you feel sorry for them, you stand in their place. Multiracial protests all over the world. It was so powerful that it produced the backlash we're seeing now. What they decided was that empathy is too strong a tool, so we're going to cut it off. And where do you cut off empathy while we're talking about youth and values? Where do we cut off empathy? Where do you first learn empathy? As a child. You learn as a child when you see another child fall down and get hurt. You feel something for them. And you learn empathy from learning the stories of other people. When I was 12 and I read The Diary of Anne Frank, I remember I carried it with me downstairs at breakfast, and I felt empathy. I felt guilt. Obviously, I was not involved in Nazi Germany, but as a human being, you know what I'm saying? So when they banned the reading of Diary of Anne Frank, you see, what they want to cut off is that feeling where you can stand in the place of someone else, and that makes you change. I don't think I ever thought about mental disabilities until I was in the 8th grade and I read Of Mice and Men. And some about Lenny. Y'all remember the story, Lenny? They don't want the empathy turned on. That's why they don't want to teach about our history. Because when those George Floyd protests were happening and their kids were coming home from the protests and telling them, this is who we are, they decided they had to shut the spigot off. All right, now let me get to the rough part. Take it back to us. So when they said that they were no longer going to tell the full story about Rosa Parks, they were going to cut off teaching Black history in Florida and other places, when they passed laws all over the country saying that teachers in public schools could not teach subjects that would promote, if you look at the legislation, this is what it said, it's not CRT, it was not DEI. The legislation says that teachers could not teach subjects that promote shame or guilt on account of race. Now, I just told you, I felt shame and guilt reading the Diary of Anne Frank. It was a good thing. It made me stand in the place of someone else whose life had nothing to do with mine, which is the essence of empathy. You know, when people say, I saw him and I thought about my own child. Well, do you have to think about your child to feel? Empathy is when you don't even have to think about your child. When you don't have to liken it to a circumstance you've been, but human to human. You can see the suffering of another human being and feel it and want to make change so that that doesn't happen. That's the spigot they turned off. And when they started doing it, I must have missed it. Was there a mass march that we had that I missed? Are you certain that schools can teach about Richard Allen? Can they teach about Ida B. Wells Barnett, a proud AME member? Can they teach about Oliver Brown, an AME minister? Does this concern us at all? And when we say, well, we will just educate our children ourselves, we're going to have our own citizenship schools in our churches, that's a beautiful thing. Understand, they're not worried about our children learning their own history. They're worried about their children learning our history. They're worried about their children feeling empathy. They're worried about their children understanding the underpinnings of this country. But where have we been on this debate? Let me take it to the Supreme Court this week, because I'm sure I don't have much time. So this week, the Supreme Court heard argument in a case out of Colorado seeking to remove President Trump from the ballot. The case hinged on a provision of the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. That amendment says that any person who has formally sworn an oath, meaning you have formally held office, state or federal office, who then participates in insurrection, cannot hold office at the state or federal level. That's what it says, okay? Now, what you probably didn't hear is, in addition to my teaching now at Howard Law School, I'm also launching there the 14th Amendment Center on Law and Democracy. So I know a little something about the 14th Amendment, so I just want you to trust me on this. Okay, so that's what it says in Section 3. So the state of Colorado decided that Trump participated in insurrection and he can't be on the ballot. Naturally, he pushed back. They had a trial, week-long trial. There was evidence, there were expert witnesses, there was testimony. Trump participated. And the trial court found, in a voluminous opinion, that Trump did participate in insurrection, but the judge didn't feel she could remove him from the ballot. Case went up through the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals agreed with the trial court's determination that Trump participated in insurrection, and reversed her on the second point and said, oh yes, not only can he, but he must be removed from the ballot. So the case went to the Supreme Court. Filed briefs. I filed an amicus brief as well. It was argued this week. And the argument did not go well for those seeking to remove Trump from the ballot. It was quite appalling, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if the decision was 8-1. I gotta say. The reason I'm raising this is because the conversation that you're hearing when you go home is going to be all about, what's the Supreme Court doing? Maybe they're deciding it this way because they have, more Trump cases coming and they're trading them off. And how is the guy who argued the case? And you're hearing all of this stuff as though this is just about politics. But how many of you know that the 14th Amendment was ratified for us? For us. 3 Civil War amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th. 13th Amendment ended slavery. 15th Amendment said you can't interfere with the right to vote based on race, color, or national origin. The 14th Amendment is the whole thing. It is the reset of this country. It's what we call, that's why we call the period after the Civil War the second founding. You didn't learn that in school. They told you the framers were Madison and Washington and Jefferson, and certainly they were the framers of our first republic and our first constitution. But our second republic, the one made after the Civil War, those framers were congressmen named John Bingham and Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, and were all the black people who were debating issues of citizenship and who were abolitionists and who were fighting for full citizenship and creating terms like equal protection and so forth in the decades before the Civil War. Those founders and framers. So we get these three amendments. I'm figuring I'm using the time I would use on the panel too. So we get these three amendments. I pause here because they were created for us. I'm going to say that again. We got three amendments in the Constitution that were created for black people. Okay. The 14th is the signature piece, is the one that sits in the middle. The 14th Amendment has 5 different sections. I went to law school, some of you are probably lawyers here. You only learned about Section 1 and Section 5. You never learned about Section 2, you never learned about Section 3, which is what this Trump case is about, you never learned about Section 4. Okay, so Section 1 is the one you know about because it has all the good stuff. The first line of Section 1 is, all persons born in the United States or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state in which they reside, what we call birthright citizenship. So listen, when you hear politicians say we're going to get rid of birthright citizenship, it's not an option, it's in the Constitution. You would have to amend the Constitution to get rid of birthright citizenship. It's not some policy choice you can just put on the ballot, but that's how they like to talk about our rights, like they're optional. It's in the Constitution. It was created to overturn the Dred Scott decision, because in the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court said that black people could not be citizens, whether they were enslaved or free. So they created birthright citizenship, which, by the way, was not the way citizenship worked in a lot of the world. You were German because your parents were German, and just because you lived in Germany didn't mean you could be German, or could be French. We were innovating something really important, birthright citizenship. And it is the reason why waves and waves of European immigrants could come in the 20th century and in one generation be American. Their babies could be born the day after they set foot on this soil, and they were American. That was unheard of. And then we call ourselves a nation of immigrants. They benefited from this provision that was created to give us citizenship. I don't mind it. Just at least acknowledge that when black people progress, when we open up citizenship for black people, white people benefit, just as they did from birthright citizenship. Okay, so that's the first one. Then you know the other things. Due process of laws. You can't be denied of life, liberty, or property without due process of laws. You're entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizenship. And for the first time in our Constitution, the word equal. Equal protection of laws. That's the first time the word is used. We think of this country as a country about equality and opportunity. That wasn't even in the first Constitution. That concept did not come as written in the Constitution until the 14th Amendment. Sure, it was in the Declaration of Independence, but it somehow didn't show up in that first Constitution. So, equal protection of laws. And that's vitally important. And everything that we fight for ultimately is realized through one of those 3 amendments. Every civil rights statute is created based on Congress's power out of one of those amendments. The Voting Rights Act comes out of Congress's enforcement power of the 15th Amendment. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 that allows us to be in this nice hotel that 70, 80 years ago we wouldn't have been in, that comes out of Congress's enforcement power from the 14th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, which ends slavery and all badges and incidents of slavery, Congress's passage of civil rights laws like Section 1981 that allows you to engage in contracts and sue under employment, when you're denied employment contracts or real estate, that all comes from the 13th Amendment. So here we are with these 3 amendments, and they're talking about it this week in Congress, the 14th Amendment, and the court looks like they're ready to ignore Section 3, and we're just like, I'm guessing that probably most of you didn't know what I'm telling you. So something's missing. That they can walk away with our stuff and we don't even know it. We You don't even know it. Let me tell you why it's important. Section 3, there were two things that the Reconstruction Congress was concerned about. Obviously, the goal was the full citizenship of black people. They believed there were two threats to that full citizenship. One, they knew that white people were going to continue to resist it, and in particular would try to keep black people from being able to vote. That's why Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, which I can guarantee you've never heard of, but you shouldn't feel bad about it, because neither has any other lawyer, including all those pundits you see on TV, none of them ever read Section 2 or Section 3 until this case last year. We're not taught it, and it's not important. I'm going to tell you what Section 2 says. This will blow your mind. Section 2 says that any state that does not allow eligible voters who are male and 21 years of age to vote will have their representation in Congress reduced by the number of people they disenfranchise. Now, we've never activated this. We went for a Voting Rights Act. But the Constitution says that because they knew that southern states would try to keep black people from voting, they weren't ready to put affirmative black voting rights in the 14th Amendment, but they thought, well, this will be an incentive for southern whites not to get in the way of black people voting. We will reduce their representation. Two important things about that. Number one, it says 21 years of age because until we got to the 26th Amendment, right, you had to be 21 years old to vote, and the 26th Amendment, 18-year-olds were given the right to vote. But it's also the first time the word male shows up in the Constitution. And we have more time, and we can talk about the fight between, this is what broke up the abolitionists and the suffragettes. Because it took one woman another 50 years to get their vote. But it was believed that the white men did not want their wives voting, and so they didn't want it snuck in. So they had to put the word male in. We can talk about that another time. Okay, so that's Section 2. That sounds pretty powerful, right? So here these tools are on the table that we have never activated and that we don't even know about. So when they then essentially take the power out of Section 3, which it sounds like this court is getting ready to do based on the argument I heard on Thursday, I get worried anytime this court decides that they are not going to give the full meaning of a provision of Section of the 14th Amendment what it deserves. I'm going to leave you with this and I quit. Let me tell you the few occasions when the Supreme Court has done this in the past. What are the occasions when the Supreme Court has betrayed the promise, the language, the intention of the 14th Amendment? It started not too long after they were ratified. So the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. The 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870. And then the Supreme Court started to get involved because the Congress started to pass statutes. They passed the Ku Klux Klan Act to try to deal with the violence that was happening, interfering with our right to vote. They passed the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which was supposed to give us access to public accommodations. And then we have the Supreme Court challenges. A case called U.S. versus Cruikshank. This was the case in which several white men were prosecuted for a conspiracy to interfere with the right to vote of black people. It emanated from the Colfax Massacre, if you've ever heard of it, in Louisiana, where, this is why when I saw January 6th, it did not look unfamiliar to me. Because in the Colfax Massacre, there was an election in which blacks and Republicans won, and white men, Democrats, Klansmen, and so forth, attacked the courthouse where the ballots were kept and killed a whole slew of black men. And that case went to the Supreme Court on whether or not you could protect, right? Whether or not the statute that was supposed to protect against conspiracies could be used to prosecute these men, because obviously the southern states weren't going to prosecute them. And the Supreme Court said, no, no, no. No, the 14th Amendment only really gets at state action. And so since they were just a band of men, that wasn't state action. And what's interesting is what happened after that. When the Ku Klux Klan Act first passed, the Klan had been all but decimated by 1872. But after that decision in 1875, the Klan started to come back. That's the first time. Second time, Civil Rights Act, I told you, 1875, public accommodations. That case went to the Supreme Court in a set of cases that were all brought together called the Civil Rights cases, decided in 1883, in which the court said that no, they could not stop discrimination in public accommodations because that's private discrimination. And the Chief Justice said, how long must the black man be the special favorite of the laws? This is 20 years after slavery ended. And then we all know the third one was the interpretation of the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, which opened us up to Jim Crow for the next 60 years. So when the Supreme Court misfires on the 14th Amendment, it can lead to catastrophe for us. So we have to wake up and understand what is happening and be engaged when tools are being taken off the table. This is really the last thing. This is a consequential year, maybe more consequential than any I've ever seen politically in my adult life, for sure. Voting is going to be key. When I say voting is key, I am not talking about the presidency. I know you're going to vote for the president. My question is whether if you're here in North Carolina, you're going to vote for the supervisor of public education. Are you going to vote for the judges? Are you going to vote for the DA? Are you going to vote for the public safety commissioner? Are you going to vote for the sheriff? Are you going to vote for the school board? Or are you going to just let these school boards decide that your history can't be taught? The reason they can do that is because we sat down on the school board elections. We don't run for school board, we don't vote in school board elections, we don't go to school board meetings. Why? My mantra has been, leave no power on the table. And so if we want to communicate values to young people, it's going to be by what we do. It's going to be by your youth minister saying, we're going to the school board meeting tonight just to observe. That's what we're going to do tonight. We're not going to go to the movies, we're going to go to the school board meeting. It comes from you sitting down at your table and your kids seeing you researching the different candidates for sheriff and what they stand for and what the powers of the sheriff are. It's going to come from you deciding that, once a month I call my senator, 202-224-3121. I call my senator and I tell him what I think about the following issues. I call my House member. I always go to the town hall that my congressperson has. I like to go to a city council meeting once or twice a year. Have your kids ever seen you do that? Or are you scolding them about not voting when you know when you get in that booth and you see that ballot, you vote for president and governor and mayor, and then it says pick 3 judges and you're like, I don't know. Are you voting? And I include myself in this. If you don't know the difference between the two DA candidates and you pick one because you see a D or an R next to their name, are you responsibly voting? Listen, I love us, I really do. But I see the danger. And I really think we have to wake up. We are the ones. We're calling these names from the past. And I gotta tell you, at this point in my life, I've been a civil rights lawyer for 30 years. I've made a million sacrifices in time with my children, in focus and concentration, and I used to tell them, I'm making the world I want you to inherit. And nothing shakes me more than the feeling that I am passing along to them a world that is in worse condition than the one that was given to me. It shames me. So we might want to start thinking less about what we say about Frederick Douglass, my hero, Ida B. Wells Barnett, the Four Horsemen, and really this is probably the time we want to start thinking about what 2 and 3 generations will be saying about us. What will they be saying we did in this moment of crisis? So that's all I'm asking. I love you. I know that you're praying. I know that you're faithful. But we're in a time of emergency and you're going to have to stretch. You're going to have to, just a little bit. You don't have to do that, but you go to one meeting every quarter. you show up and they get nervous when you come in, I want you to know. Come in with some people, they get nervous, they talk different, they table amendments, say let's not talk about it this meeting. They do some things, but they don't expect you. They know you're not coming. Where are your petitions? You don't go sit in the courthouse and sit in the back just to watch some of these judges. You just let them do whatever they do, talk however they talk. You can't just sit in the court, it's public. You can go sit in it. But you don't do it, not like it's yours. Claim it. If not for yourself, for our children, for our grandchildren, for their children, and in honor of those who came before us, who made the ultimate sacrifice. Just so we can sit here and have lunch. That's what we move right past that. We didn't even think about that. We just think we just come in, we sit down, we pour, we eat the food. Do you understand? The 70, 80 years ago, this room was not happening. At all. Here? Come on. Are we in Greensboro? Y'all know it wasn't happening. Couldn't even get a burger at Woolworth's counter. But you here? What do we want? What doors do we want to be open for our young people, for their children and their children? Let's unite in this fight. Let's make this intergenerational. Let's be the values that we want to communicate to our children. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ifill. Give her a hand clap of praise one more time. And now let's recognize and we'll bring up for closing remarks our servant bishop, Bishop James Levert Davis. Give him a hand clap of praise. Stand on your feet.
Express the way that she deserves to express on your behalf our sense of gratitude, appreciation, enlightenment, and the challenge that you have put before us, and how grateful we are. Thank you, Dr. Ifill. Thank you. Whenever we have asked Dr. Ifill, who is one of us, to come, she has always responded in the positive. She has inspired us to know that we're in this thing together, and certainly you have responded when she was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. You made it possible to offer unto that organization some $80,000 for the support of the work that she is doing. And how grateful we are for you, and you're realizing how necessary it is for you to put forth that kind of effort. Again, Dr. Ifill, thank you for taking the time to challenge us. Put your hands together. To Dr. Colson and to Dr. Bonner and to Reverend Myers and others who work on the staff of this granting process. How grateful we are for the beginning of what we hope will be fundamentally a turning around of our thinking and to re-energize us to understand the words of Dr. Ifill just a moment ago, that we're handing to our children the world that we want them to inherit. And if we don't do our part as our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers did, we we will not give them as much as has been given us, and that is a sin. I am hoping that you can see fundamentally what this intergenerational process is all about. Somewhere along the line, we must understand that we must get back to the basics. And the basics begin right where you live, right in the neighborhood where your house is located, right in the church where you go, right in the schoolhouse that's right up the street from you, right in the PTA meetings that we don't always go to as we should. The basics are beginning the institutionalizing of the things that you were raised on. Sometimes we want so much for our children not to go through the things that we have gone through until we forget the things that we went through that we ought to want them to go through. We ought to want them to learn how to pray before eating. We ought to want them to understand that when they go get up in the morning, the first thing they should do is to thank God for another day. We ought to want them to understand the last thing they do at night is to thank God for their mamas, their daddies, their sisters, their brothers, their neighbors, their friends. We ought to want them to understand the norms that Dr. Ifill talked about. Lord have mercy, that was so heavy. I mean, just norms, just norms. And we have the norms that are getting away from us, and we have forgotten how to shame ourselves. How grateful we are for such a word that reminds us of what mom and dad taught us. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. Thank you. No, thank you. Walk straight. Look folk in the eye. Let folk know that you are somebody. Show that you are mamas and daddies, sons and daughters. Look at them like you came from somewhere and from somebody. Act like you are acting like you are going where you know where you want to go. Look like you want to be somebody. Act like you want to be somebody. Talk like you want to be somebody. Speak the King's language, because it is the language of acceptance in this country. Then when you do all of that, let them feel the pride. One of the things that where is he? Where is that arrogant Matthew Watt? One of the things I like about Matthew, and I pick on him because he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind. I mean, if he minds, I'm gone anyway in another few months. But you know, when I came here, somebody said he's, when you think high of yourself, and somebody, you've been raised in a house to make you know you are somebody. When you walk like you're somebody, when you talk like you're somebody, everybody wants to give you a label. And I could have picked some other folks. I just picked him because I could pick on him. But put that in our children. Help our children to know they came from good stuff, royal stuff. I mean, we are somebody. We have a rich heritage that we've come from. Thank you, and I pray and hope that the ministry of this intergenerational sponsorship of somebodyness in Jesus will be one that you can inspire others to know. We got a responsibility, and we ought to take that on. Now that begins with all of us. So loan yourself to the fellowship of this leadership. Don't let it die here. Don't you dare eat their chicken and then go home and do nothing. You had all that good chicken and string beans and bread and iced tea and mousse. If you eat it and you go home the same way and do the same thing, I hope your stomach hurts. God bless you, real.
Thank you all so much. stay tuned for so much more. It's coming. But go on, go back and reimagine intergenerational Christian values and beliefs. Amen? God bless you. God bless you. We thank you. Amen.